Let me check. Whoops, I don't want that. Okay, so this is going to cover the last half of whole path exploits on week 9. I'm just saying this again for the purpose of the recording. So we covered half of whole path exploits in week 9. We're now week 10, so we're going to cover the second half of this from slide 16. But let's have a quick run through, if you don't mind. So these slides are we've covered previously software exploitation and networking, and now we're tying it all together, how an attacker or even a pen tester, a good guy, can get into an end system. And it covers ways of gaining access to networks and systems. So it's everything now, thinking about everything. We've covered gaining access to networks. We're going to talk about now gaining access to non-networked or hardened systems, slide 16, and gaining unauthorized access through social engineering, and understand the weakness is in networks and software to mitigate attack and exploitation. Okay, so we've covered the pen testing lifecycle, which is what a friendly guy does, a pen tester who should help a company. But it's the middle part of this: information gathering, footprinting and scanning, vulnerability assessment, exploitation. Then post-exploitation, you can go deeper and deeper, pivoting or leveraging your way into new systems and finding more information. This is also what an attacker does, so a pen tester replicates that. But then ultimately, a pen tester would do some reporting. So what we looked at what we can do for targeted attacks and non-targeted attacks, and we had some discussion on that last week, and what is shared between them and what is not shared between them. So some tools like these things like information gathering, footprinting is kind of usually done in targeted attacks. Non-targeted attacks you might encounter spam, general scan and vulnerability assessment without a target, so you scan lots of machines and just find somebody. Spreading of viruses and trojans, but these I also noted can be used to cover your tracks and hide that you're doing a targeted attack. Sometimes more overt attacks against countries often have these overt parts as a distraction, and then the covert operations go in a targeted way. So they can be used in a targeted attack as well, but generally in a non-targeted attack. We looked at an exercise, this one, for finding ways into the network, and also think novelly about this, think about all possibilities, such as sending emails to somebody who's going to read it, send it with a payload. But if you do your open source intelligence first, your information gathering, you can find out exactly what software, maybe you can find out exactly what software they're using and target an exploit against that particular piece of software. So if you send them a Word document or a PDF, then they open it, they can possibly run malware on that particular client's machine. Then they'll be inside of the network, maybe they can connect out, and then they can scan the rest of the network internally. So you can leverage and pivot, things like that. Also consider wireless networks, but you need to be nearby, social and human and organizational ways in. So you could just walk in, plug something in and walk out. And if you've got a yellow vest on, it might look like you're doing something important, if you've got like BT on the back or something. Or you can actually interact with other human beings and trick your way in. Or we even talked about dropping USB sticks and how we can convince them to open files on the USB stick. You could, through information gathering, it could be the party about what could have a party name of what lots of people went to in the company and have pictures in it. However, the pictures contain malware. And it could be names of people in there, or even pictures that you've taken of the people who work in the company, so they think it's legitimate. And when they open the file, yeah, you've put malware into those pictures. Getting further access, once you're in, to some extent, you can pivot, also called leveraging in some ways. So let's talk about a new exercise. This is where we continue on from last week now, after that summary. We've got this network you see shaded in the background, but this time I'll talk about a standalone machine, and I asked you to consider these slides as kind of extra homework last week. So we've got a standalone machine, so hopefully you've all read what this is about. We have a client machine here. This client is well, the human is the accountant and the finance officer or secretary who works for them. And what happens every day, here's the scenario, is that between these two machines, one staff moves data from a client machine to a standalone machine. By standalone machine, I mean it's not got any Wi-Fi, it's not got any wired connection. It's it's unplugged from the world. I mean, it's plugged in to the power, of course, but otherwise it's not plugged into any network. But they use a USB stick to move data from the client machine to the standalone machine every day using a USB stick. And they always do it every day, so it's predictable in that sense. So for maybe bank holiday or something. The standalone machine holds MS Word documents, MS being Microsoft, PDFs, and other files such as Excel spreadsheets and stuff because it's financial data. So they've probably got spreadsheets there. And the staff occasionally look at these files on the standalone machine. So when they carry the files across, they might check a few files to make sure it copied properly. Like they might open them, like they might double click on an MS Word doc here to see it copied properly or a PDF. And maybe at other times they also work on the standalone machine when they want to look at some old data from weeks ago or years ago. For example, an old client or checking how much money they made from somebody. They'll be able to open files then, and they might check more modern files as well. So the question is the standalone machine secure? And I'll open it up to answers in a moment. And also describe an exploitation method and an exfiltration method to get data out to an attacker. We'll consider all of the vectors and access methods. What security measures can be put in place to stop or at least mitigate those? So anyway, let's go to the back a moment to the fundamental question before we go this way, looking at more technical measures. So I asked the question, is the standalone machine secure? And at least give me a hint to why it's not secure. So I open it to questions now. Open it to answers, really. Anyone? What do you think? Is the standalone machine secure? Have they got something? Have they sussed it out, this company? Or as an attacker, could you get files of this system or influence it? Yep, go on, Ayaz. Go ahead.
Yeah, that's the only way is to that you just mentioned it, to make someone use the USB to exploit the system. Otherwise, if it's secure in terms of virus and the interfaces have been properly secured, so I don't think there's a way to get into that system.
Okay. Yeah, so it's not connected over any wired or wireless, but you've got the USB being plugged in every day. So you think it is secure then?
If there's no open interfaces to put the USB or to get the information or access to the computer, then I think it's not possible. Yes, the Benjamin just mentioned it, to take the physically.
Could we get, and I open this to anyone, could we get malware on that USB stick? It's also being plugged, it's being plugged into two things. It's being plugged into both the client machine, which is connected to a network, the USB stick, and the standalone machine every day. So could we get malware on the USB stick? Maybe crafted bespoke malware. Well, let's think about crafting our own malware. But yeah, you could. One example was Stuxnet. Is everyone familiar with Stuxnet? Maybe not. I think I've mentioned it before, but let's go through it. So Stuxnet, let me just don't know if there's technical diagrams there. Let's see what's in Wikipedia. So Stuxnet was a piece of software which, oh, really? Which was carried over USB sticks. It seems to have been aimed against the Iranian uranium nuclear refinement processes. They were trying to make refined uranium for power stations and perhaps nuclear weapons. And apparently everything that they had in the factory for making refined uranium was disconnected from the internet, but a piece of software was put onto USB sticks, a piece of malware specifically, and it found its way on to the standalone machines. And it's a lot more complicated than this. It requires certificates and everything. Our case is simpler. And it was the malware started running on those standalone machines and corrupted the processes that were being performed and controlled by computers to stop the uranium refinement and also give false readings as well. So they thought everything was working fine while everything was starting to break. So that's an example of malware that can pass on USB, and it might not have been a USB drop. If they plugged it into any computer on the internet, then at that point it could have got malware on it. So what do you think about in this case? Surely something similar. What might be the first step, anyone? So we've got a USB stick plugged into the client machine, and then later in the evening it gets plugged into a standalone machine in the morning or some point in the day in the client machine. So while it's plugged into the client machine, maybe an attacker can get some malware on it. How might we do that? And what kind of malware might we want to put on this? So I'm saying there is a way in. It's not secure. Anyone? What do you think the first step might be? Well, if you can be more specific about. Yep. Anyway, just go back. Well, you can physically take the machine, okay, but let's not consider we're going to physically take it in this scenario. So, bullet point. Yep, as long as USB drive is used on the other machine and going between the two regularly in this case as well, so it's even easier, then it's not secure. Benjamin talks about keyloggers or reverse shells, but if you can expand on that, anybody want to speak or even write? How can we first compromise the first machine, and what kind of malware might we want to put on to the USB stick, and how can we trigger that malware to run? Yeah, Trojans for IAs. Are you talking about the initial infiltration of the client machine here, or the standalone machine? Yeah, a Trojan is effectively malware that looks like it's good software for something. Could be like a small editor, text editor, or whatever piece of software, but it also contains malware. One of the BitTorrents was a Trojan as well, and it still is, as I found it. MicroTorrent is a Trojan. Never use MicroTorrent. It's a BitTorrent client. Payload, yeah, okay. So let's walk through it a little bit. Firstly, what we've got here, yep, technical measures. Okay, so first of all, you'll have to get software running on this client machine here. Maybe you could pivot from somewhere else. So that's always an option, and then send an internal message or internal malware to the client. But that adds an extra step. Let's just get to the point of what you could possibly do. You could, maybe you know the name of the person through information gathering. You know the name of the accountant or finance officer who's running the computer here. So you could email them, and you can find out what software they're using as well, perhaps. So you can email them maybe a PDF file, an MS Word document, something like that, which will target this client's software program. And so you email them something that they're going to read. So you make it a real name. You maybe make yourself look like a business client or something like that, something convincing, so that they're going to open your file. So it looks like, because they don't want to lose business. So it's targeted against an individual, the company, and an individual. So you email it to them, goes to the email server, but they pull their email and read the email. So eventually they get the email and the attachment on their own machine. Now you're not running the attachment yet, so it might be safe in most cases. So anyway, they read the email and they are convinced that they should have a look at the attachment, maybe a PDF. And when they open the PDF, you put some malware into the PDF, which is targeted against the PDF viewer, whatever PDF viewer they're using. There's often loads of exploits in PDF readers because PDF is a very complicated language. It actually runs a little bit of a script inside of PDF that crafts the fonts and stuff. So you can relatively easily exploit PDFs. Wouldn't say completely easy, but relatively easy. So an attacker can get some software running on the client machine as that user account. Now, so the next question is, and I'll open this question up to all of you, is, okay, you've got an attacker has a piece of software running here, maybe even a communication path back to themselves of the internet. They might have been able to do that. And this piece of malware is running invisibly, at least for the time being. They crafted it themselves, so it's not going to be checked. It's not going to be found by a virus checker. So what would this malware do? What are our options now as an attacker with this piece of malware? What can we get the malware to do if we want to pull files off the standalone machine? What do you think we could do? Think about what you want to craft rather than just saying terms like Trojan and stuff. Think, what do we want the malware to do step by step? Maybe mention a few things, or mention a few things that the malware should do in order to ultimately pull files off the standalone machine.
I can just say for the first step, you can get a login ID and password. Or yeah, you're just talking about how to take control of the system, like to.
Well, you don't really have to take control of the system even. You just want to exfiltrate. You want to steal the files from the standalone machine.
Yeah.
Ultimately, bring the files back in a hidden way to the client machine, so the malware hides them somewhere, and then maybe send them back out of the network to the client, to the attacker. But you've only got malware running here now, so how can it do that? The only thing it's got access to, in addition to the local files, 1 or 2 files, is the USB stick. So maybe what can it do with the USB stick or the files on the USB? So auto dump what onto the USB stick?
Auto dump is a kind of pivot, is it?
Well, it depends specifically on what you're trying to achieve. What would you dump onto the stick? I'm just answering what Benjamin has written here.
Could you auto dump like sort of just any and every file that you wanted to, and just put it all onto the stick? Or you could pre-program it beforehand, so when it's plugged in, the command will automatically shoot up and start sending everything back to the attacker that way.
You mean while on the client machine, you dump onto the USB stick?
Yeah.
But what you want to do is all the files you want on the standalone machine. So yeah, if you've got them here on the client machine, which you don't have at the moment, you can send them back out to the attacker. But all the files are on the standalone machine, and you've only got the malware here on the client. So the first thing you want to do is somehow get the malware to run on the standalone machine. Okay. So how can we possibly do that?
Could you do it through like creating a problem on the client machine so that they have to go and use the standalone machine?
Perhaps. I don't know about in this case scenario, but yeah, quite possibly that could happen if you're moving things back and forth. I've got probably an easier way in mind though. So you've got not many files here on the client, and they move files every day and clear the files. They move the files across to the standalone machine at the end of each day. So what we want to do, we've got the malware running here on the client. The malware needs to make a copy of itself or some similar malware onto the USB stick. So it needs to get onto the USB stick. And then when you plug the USB stick into the standalone machine, we need to get the malware to run on the standalone machine. How can we do that? So how can we get malware to run on the standalone machine? Think about the scenario. Let's go back to this. The staff, well, they might, when they move it across, they might check one or two files to make sure it copied. The staff check the files to make, they open the files, like they might open a PDF or MS Word document or Excel spreadsheet to make sure the file copied right. And at other times, the staff occasionally look at other files on the standalone machine as well. So how can we get the malware off the USB stick to be actually running on the standalone machine?
Could you put an executable inside one of the files, so when they open it up, it'll automatically run?
Yeah, effectively an executable. Yeah, put the malware inside. Maybe you don't know which files they're going to open, so maybe it can copy itself in every single file. Auto run is not. Yeah, the term is auto run, but it's not the traditional Windows auto run. Because auto run never does automatically runs programs anymore because of the security problems. So yeah, it automatically runs. What you'd have to do, hang on, where's it gone? Come on. What you'd have to do is it copies the malware into every single PDF, Microsoft Word document, or Excel spreadsheet, or whatever file it can copy itself into. And it copies it into it in such a way that whichever file you load and run on the standalone machine, it will trigger the exploit if the attacker gets it right. It'll trigger the exploit, and you can start running the malware on the standalone machine. And then once it's running, it can try to make sure it always runs. So, does that make sense? We've got malware running on the standalone machine. Now, we haven't got the data back yet. We've got malware running on the client. We've got maybe the same or different malware running that we programmed it, so we're in control of it. We had to do this through a lot of planning as well, beforehand, but we've got malware running on the client and malware running on the standalone machine now. But what we want to do, our aim is to take all the files off the standalone machine back to the client and then exfiltrate the data out of the internet. Can we do that? And how generally can we do that as well? Not just can we do it. Any ideas?
Can you please repeat?
Okay. We have malware running on the client machine.
No, just the last sentence. Can we?
Yeah, I can't remember specifically. Let me just go through it again. We've got malware running on the client machine, which probably got a network connection out to the attacker. We've got malware running on the standalone machine, also under our, well, we programmed it, but we're not in immediate communication with it. So it's doing its own thing. Well, we program that malware as an attacker. So what we want to do is exfiltrate all the data from the standalone computer, maybe thousands and thousands of PDF files, Excel files, and Microsoft Word documents. We want to exfiltrate all the data back to the client machine, and out of the internet. And just to note, when this person copies the files to this standalone machine, the person also deletes the files on the disk.
It feels like an Italian job. Like you keep on, like basically set up a process or just watch a process happening. So you have to look at it this way. So I think this is the only way.
So you mean a watch a process on the standalone machine?
What's the routine basically is going on through, just like you have said, there's a backup routine, a daily backup routine, so that the files have been transferred from and to the standalone PC. So you have to be sure about something is going on or a service issue with the standalone PC. Just like a thing happened with me now. My computer just started going on the sleep mode instantaneously and not coming back to me. I just removed the battery and it was fine. I don't know what's the problem with the battery making some issues with my computer. So I just removed it now. Now I've just got my data back and up and running. So
yeah. I think we don't need to rely on like creating a problem in this case. If we've got malware running on the client and malware running on the standalone machine, what we can do, okay, this malware can be doing almost anything. Okay, it might not have admin rights, but it doesn't need admin rights. It just needs enough power to get hold of the files. So the malware, it can check if the USB stick has been plugged in. And if the USB stick has been plugged in, it can start copying as many files as it can onto the USB stick. Okay, so, but I did say that the person, when they copy the files off, they delete all the files on the USB stick. Okay, so when they carry it back, the person with the USB stick thinks that the USB stick is empty. So what can we do if the malware is going to write files to the USB stick on the standalone machine? What can we do with those files, or what do we have to do with those files? We want the files to be hidden.
Yes, obviously it must be hidden. Yeah.
So it's hidden while traveling the other direction. So the user of the USB stick doesn't realize that it's got loads of data on. So we're hiding it from them. So we can either create hidden files directly, is one way. Another way is that you can actually write at a lower level. You can write into the blocks. When you've got no files on a disk, the blocks of data, it's still got blocks of data, and it can be filled with garbage. You could fill that garbage data with real data. and you would never notice. So you can actually hide data on a disk like that, a USB stick or whatever it is. So you can copy as much as possible onto the USB stick and carry it across. When it finally gets plugged into the client at the end of the next day, for copying the other way, the malware on the client can look at the USB stick and it can realize it's got lots of hidden files on it and quickly copy them off locally. Now, we might only have a small USB stick, maybe 16 gig or something, I don't know. And the data we want to copy off is 1 terabyte. So every day, every time it plugs in, it can keep a track of which files it copied and which files are remaining inside of the malware. And every day it can copy a little bit more, an extra 16 gig of data from the standalone machine to the client. And the client can be daily sending it back out, the network connection out to the internet. It'll go through the firewall because it'll just open a web connection and all web traffic will go through. Firewalls work that way. When you've got traffic working its way out, firewalls generally let you through, mostly. Are there any questions about this?
Well, not really a question, but it's something that it's a proper case study, what I believe. You have to go through it stepwise, you know. So.
Yep, yeah. So this is a demonstration just to show that it is not secure. You think it's secure? In government, I was previously working in government with secure information as well. So to stop this kind of thing, we still use clients and we use standalone machines, but instead of having a USB stick, we use write once only CDs. You get a CD, you put data on it, write once, so the older CDs or a DVD, and then you take it to the standalone machine, and then you take your data off, and then you snap the CD. You've got a CD eater, which destroys the CD. So it never goes back, and every day or every time you copy, you use a new CD or DVD, and you destroy your media after use. And this is used in government and sensitive organizations as well. That's how they do that. So the data only ever goes one way. Technically, you could still get malware on this standalone machine that way, but no information is ever coming off it. Any other statements or questions?
This is a past experience that you just explained, that the data goes only one way. So in banks, usually we write CDs of the databases every day, which is called.
Yeah, indeed. And then you probably destroy the CDs as well. Is that right? Yeah, indeed. Yeah, in a lot of government and banks, yeah, they do that. Yeah, thanks. So otherwise, whoops. With this example, actually you could imagine this as a network connection, but the data goes once per day. In other words, and it goes as one big lump. In other words, the carrying of the USB stick. So technically, even though it's called standalone machine, in this case, because it's going via USB, it's like one big packet goes one time per day. So the throughput is 16 gigabytes once per day. You get it in one big lump, so one packet per day. So technically, it could be kind of like a network connection, but it's a hand-carried packet in that sense. Okay, so I've kind of gone into this one actually. Technical measures is, well, we could use a write once media, such as a CD or DVD, and a policy is never to plug USB sticks in, and also to destroy the CD or DVD immediately after use, or when you finish. Yeah, if you've copied the data and check you've copied the data, then the policy is to destroy it. Yeah, I think that's the main ones anyway. Okay, let's move on. So So in a whole or full path exploit, we look at entry points from an attacker's perspective. It might show most of the stages of the pen testing life cycle, but the motive and the outcome is different. As a pen tester, you're not motivated to destroy the company or exfiltrate data. You're motivated only to find the flaws which could lead to that. And an attacker may have a number of further stages. Once they find an exploit, they will then follow through the exploit, get the data out, or maybe sabotage the company or something like that, sabotage the data. Whereas a pen tester would not do that. They'd find the exploitable hole, and then that's usually around about it. They might go further to find more exploits if they're using it as a pivot or leverage. Okay, so let's look at information gathering to start with. I'll just give you a minute. Hopefully you've had to think through this anyway. So thinking about information gathering stage previously covered, how can we mitigate against this or hinder information gathering? Any thoughts on hindering information gathering?
You could keep a close eye of what's available detail-wise about your company online on publicly available records.
Yep. And what if there's too much information online already?
Yeah.
Taking a step back, what can we do in the company then?
Could rearrange a bunch of things if everything's already out there. You could privatize all your stuff and then start rearranging the layout or procedures.
Oh yeah. Talking about procedures, then, what kind of policy could we have in the company to say mitigate against information gathering?
Secure business processes.
Okay, secure business processes. What kind of secure business processes?
Information moving in and out of the company.
Yep. So maybe like information the company creates, but what about other information, like talking on social media about certain things?
You could mitigate, like, legally what your employees can post online about your work environment and stuff like that, or non-disclosure agreements.
Yeah, so yeah, non-disclosure agreements. Most companies don't go that far, except for the odd piece of technology. But yeah, you could do something like that. So first of all, if you just don't want normal internal company documents to leak, it's often wise to put something on the top, like on every single document, like property of whatever, internal use only, or the government would put things like secret, confidential, and things like that. So it's often to put the header on, and if you write internal, if it's normal policy to write internal use only, whatever company name, then the worker employees there are less likely to put something out there thinking that they can share it. Also, this must be backed up by policy and training. Okay, but what about normal chit chat about the company that might reveal information? What can we ask them to do? Say chit chat that might reveal about what software they're using and setups of software. Anyone?
Well, since the information is already like out in the public, they may choose to only accept information over a secure tunnel.
Yeah, even if there's information out there, at any time, a company can start transforming itself anyway. Okay, it might be might take a while before you know that information is truly old and no new information is going out. But you can set up training and talk about posting of internal software state or software versions or what software you're working on the inside, especially the admin team. You can make through training and policy and enforcing simple enough policy, You can get them so they don't talk about certain things, or when they do talk, if they do need to ask technical questions on how to figure out how to use something, then they post under a different name, which doesn't lead them back to the company. Like if they post in on stackoverflow.com, which is a website for helping on technical questions. So training and policy to the correct degree. The thing is, if the training and policy gets way too complex, then people end up not following the policy because it's too complicated, too many complicated rules. So it has to be quite general. We can only, it's like Robocop on Robocop 2 when I had too many rules to follow. If you got too many rules to follow, you end up not knowing what the rules are, and then you end up not following hardly any of them. It becomes quite silly. Or if some people are allowed to break the rules, then you also end up not following them. So it has to be something simple enough and limited enough and implementable. Also, as Guy points out, yeah, as Samuel pointed out, that's kind of thing I've said. As Guy pointed out, you could also implement a bring your own device, BYOD policy, to restrict files being taken off site. And the BYOD, bring your own device policy, might be for anything from very, very limited usage of your own devices. Often on secure sites, you even put your mobile phone in a container before entering a room. You can't have any microphones on you or things like that, recording equipment. So that's kind of strange. You can bring your own phone, but you have to put it in a box before going into certain rooms. But usually bring your own device is you can connect to certain services and systems, but maybe not the more sensitive ones, that kind of thing. And they have a policy to implement on those devices as well. So it depends on the device. Any other things to add to this? Any thoughts?
I don't know if it's done, but like, could you fake information and put it out on the internet for people to find? And
Oh
then,
yeah, I think so. Yep, definitely. You could you could do it with yourself. I've heard some people doing it with themselves to like confuse Facebook, sometimes jokingly, but other times not. Yeah, so they've got false information on you. A company can do the same. You could put false information out there in a convincing way. There's a lot of third parties that do that as well. They sell their services for putting false information out there and producing a false perspective. This is kind of like an information operation or information warfare, not really warfare in this sense, but yeah, false information. And in fact, you could do it a little bit out of band of here, but some more sensitive companies, they use something called honeypots. You can do your dissertation in honeypots as well, by the way. I'm interested in this topic. But a honeypot is like a fake server, and it can, if you connect to it, only an attacker will ever connect to it, but it pretends to be a real server. So the fake information you could put out could attract attackers to your fake server, and you can find out how they are attacking and what they're after and so on. So there's that kind of thing. And honeypots are used in a lot of companies, but they're very hush-hush. There's not much published on them, because if you know that they're there, kind of defeats the object. So they're mainly made by companies with non-disclosure agreements. There's some open source honeypots out there, but all the attackers will know how they work. So they've got a signature they can detect. All the real proper working honeypots are owned by companies and have non-disclosure agreements with the company generally. So yeah, you can put false information out, and that'd be quite good. Well, yeah, psychological operations. We're mainly talking about companies, though. I suppose some companies do psychological operations on their customers. Or the computer attackers. Okay, so footprinting and scanning mitigations. So we talked about information gathering mitigations. Let's talk about the next stage of the pen testing lifecycle. So footprinting and scanning and looking at mitigations. So consider the network previously. Let's consider mitigations to mitigate against footprinting and scanning. Footprinting and scanning is if you're out well, you could be anywhere. Let's take the example, if you're outside of the network, you could scan all, can you scan all the computers inside? Well, usually not, because usually the firewall will stop you from getting past itself, unless you're connecting to like email to send an email, or a VPN server, or a voice and video server for voice chat, that kind of thing. So you usually cannot scan the network from outside, but if you get into the network and get malware running on one of these machines, like through a PDF exploit, then once you're in the network, you can scan all the computers on the network. You can test what ports are open and so on. So, firstly, looking at external footprinting and scanning. The interested party is outside of the internet. Maybe, well, I'll ask now, what kind of thing could be scanned, and what can we do to mitigate against this? If somebody's trying to scan from the internet, this is mainly the easier one. So what do you think?
Footprinting through search engines.
Pardon?
Search engines, internet. What's the company is basically what it's doing. What are the external people dealing with the company? Yeah,
this is on. Yeah, that was with information gathering, but now we're talking about the next stage of the pen testing life cycle. So footprinting and scanning, this is where you use technical tools to scan the network. So what kind of setup can we do to stop external footprinting and scanning? If the attacker is out here, how can we limit scans on the network to find what computers are on the network and what services are running? Anyone? Any thoughts?
I think you can set firewall policies for traffic coming from outside of the organization or something.
Yep. So you'd rely on a firewall to start with, and you can limit what the firewall will forward. So as I stated briefly just before, if you try to scan any of these machines behind the network, well, it's a little bit difficult because they're on a different IP range. But let's just ignore that for now. If you try to scan them behind, you could have the firewall block all traffic except to certain computers and only certain services, certain port numbers on that IP address. So, for example, what you could do is you could do it so you only open up one or how many port numbers you need to enable an email server, and only if you try to scan through the firewall, well, it will allow traffic to the email server, but no one else on this network. If you had a VPN, then you could have it so that the firewall will only forward to that one IP address and port number, or a few port numbers needed for that VPN, and nothing else on the email server, and anything else that you have in the network as well. You could have everything else is uncontactable from the internet. The firewall will just block all traffic if it started from the outside. If it starts from the inside, though, that's a different thing. So pretty much anything could be scanned if this was a proper, if you had IP if you had the full IP address range, not one public IP address here, everything could technically be scanned if you didn't have a firewall. So you have to block everything, except for those services which are reachable from the outside. Furthermore, in addition to that, there could be misconfiguration of the firewall. So it's accidentally, yep, firewall policies. What happened if we got misconfiguration of the firewall? How could we deal with that? Misconfiguration meaning that we think we set it correctly, but it didn't. It's actually letting in too much traffic. How can we handle a misconfiguration? Okay, set up, we can do network monitoring as well. Yeah, is there anything else we can do? Maybe one other thing I can think of.
I just need to ask something like, is the for scanning the network, is the ICMP protocol responsible for that?
For the networking?
Yeah, to scan it. Yeah, is it the ICMP protocol?
Well, we're going to cover it more in 7.607. But no, not only. ICMP does ping, but you can do scans at, if you're testing the port numbers, that's just to test the existence of an IP address. The computer, you use ping or interface really. You can also use TCP, UDP. You can use many different protocols. It could be a protocol that pretends to attempt to connect to the machine. You assume that there's a TCP or UDP port on the other computer, and if it's not there, you'll get a message coming back saying it's not there. Sometimes an ICMP message back, but sometimes a other message coming back, or it might just ignore it. But if it is there, if there is another machine on the other end of an attempted TCP connection or a UDP packet, then sometimes you get a response. So it's not only ICMP, you can set up TCMP connections and UDP packets to try to connect to an imagined service, and you often get a response. Sometimes you get a response, and sometimes getting no response is also an answer. So it's a little bit more complicated than just that. For example, you could connect, email uses TCP. To scan for an email server, you could connect to all TCP on all computers if you got the port number for usual email servers. I can't remember what it is, 20 something maybe, port 20 odd. And if you get a connection, you found an email server. If you don't get a connection, well, it was either blocked or, in fact, if you get no packet back, it was blocked. If you get a closed connection back, that means there's no service there. So yeah, it's a bit more complicated than just ICMP packets. You can find out a lot more from other protocols as well. You can do a lot of scanning. Anyway, you can do network monitoring, system mitigation. So if you accidentally have this firewall misconfigured and it accidentally lets through too much, then, and this has happened a lot, then you can have something monitoring the network, maybe even on the same machine, and it can monitor for scans. Scans often come in certain patterns, or ICMP probes coming in could block ICMP probes. You can have it automatically detect for that. You can also have something a bit more fancy than network monitoring. It's called Intrusion Detection System, IDS, as well. But the other thing I was thinking of, in addition to network monitoring continually, that's in mitigation, is you can also have, you've got a firewall here to block traffic coming in, but on the email server and VPN server, you could also have a firewall there that only lets in email traffic to the email server and only lets VPN. So you've got effectively second firewall on each machine. So you're not relying on this one firewall. You're relying on a firewall in the individual server and the firewall earlier as well. So if you've got misconfiguration in one, hopefully you stop it with a second one. Okay, how about internal footprinting and scanning? What this means is that an attacker has got leverage, has pivoted to a machine inside of the network, say this client machine here, and they can now scan all the computers in the network. They can scan in many different ways. One is ICMP to scan what IP addresses exist. Another way is with TCP and UDP. Another way is at level 4, the transport protocol, to see which services exist. And it can find out that, well, this has got an email server running, probably. This has got a file server, ports open, there's a printer there, and it can find out that information. And you can even probe at a higher level, and it can also probe with sending fake packets. So it thinks it's a printer, so it tries sending a printer message, and if it responds saying, yeah, I'm a printer, tell me what you want to print in, or it might say, you're not authorized to print. But at least it reveals itself as a printer then. So you've got scanning at multiple layers from layer 3, layer 4, layer 5 application scanning. So you're inside of the network on this client machine. What mitigations can we use? You can scan any of these machines. What kind of mitigations can we employ inside of this network? Perhaps some of the same, perhaps some different ones. Any thoughts? Would it be entirely the same kind of mitigations? We haven't got a firewall inside, so. Oh yeah, this is some of the changes we can make to an application, a networked application. So disable directory listing on web server, restrict DNS zone transfer and web services. Yeah, we can tighten the applications and what they show internally. So that's one thing we can do. We don't have a firewall between the client or the other machines, but we could possibly segment this a little further. We could split the network up into 2, maybe 3 subnetworks, and we could have a gateway and a firewall between them if we want to be a little bit more secure. We could put some of these, like the file server, it might never serve files to the outside world. So we could put this over here if we've got a firewall and a further network on the inside. So it could never take a route out. And a second firewall, we could split it into multiple subnets. We could rearrange some of these onto their own subnet. So email server does communicate outside, so we'll need that over this side. But some of these other things will never communicate, or should never communicate to the outside world. So they could go further in. And you can put firewalls between them if you want to be super safe. Usually not done on such a small network, but it could be done.
Yeah, you can.
Yep, go on.
You can follow a proper data structure, data center design at a lower level, at a small level. Like
yeah, indeed. You
can
secure. What kind of aspects would be the key aspects of that kind of design, do you think?
It's the same that you just talked about, like the server services are restricted from routine network. So
yeah,
moving data in and out of the servers is basically restricted.
Yep. Okay, good. Yeah, I thought so. Just checking. Okay. Yeah, so you could have firewalls between segments of the network or routed areas. So technically, it would never be routing beyond it because of the firewall policies on the internal network. Also, intrusion detection system. Oh yeah, network monitoring. We can have that at each point. You can either have it on the firewall and gateway machine, or able to access the same information but slightly isolated so it doesn't get compromised. It is more expensive to set up if you do it that way, though. Is that what you're saying, Samuel? That to make it so complicated would be expensive? It would be more complex. It would be more expensive. That's true. Sorry, go on. It depends how much money they've got and how sensitive their information is, I suppose. Everything is a trade-off. You could keep spending more and more and more money on security. So everything really is a trade-off in a company. Companies just want to make money and spend as little expense as possible. So yeah, it's a trade-off. Okay. And you can also secure the machines further as well, including antivirus, but that's limited. There's a lot of things that can be done on the individual machines. You could lock them down further, least privilege as well. You could have a network set up based on least privilege. It becomes more complicated then, though. In big companies, especially ones that deal with sensitive information, they have that kind of system. On a smaller company, you may or may not need it, depends what you do. Okay, so I'll just run over some of these last few points a little bit more quickly so we can move on. Don't want to get a break. So similarly for vulnerability and assessment, or vulnerability assessment and exploitation. If you've got an attacker on your network, if you make it harder for them to find what services are running and what else is in the rest of the network, then it's going to be harder to exploit it and use it as a pivot as well. But we can also mitigate against finding vulnerabilities in the network and end systems. We've just really already spoke about this. We've talked about the network design, architecture, and setup and implementation. You can go further also on the end systems, trying to minimize privileges on end systems and who has what privilege to use locally and on the network. Yep, that goes into the second one. We can take measures in the system design, distribute of software as well, securing systems and applications, should I say, and there. We're going to have some hardened networks to attempt to keep people out. Firewalls to limit traffic ingressing and egressing into and out of the network. Ingressing is going into an area, egressing is going out of an area. As we've just spoken about this, actually, compartmented subnets with firewalls. You can also have intrusion detection system hanging off these, looking at the traffic going through them, or on one side or the other, or both. You can have virtual networks as well, though be careful if VNet or virtual network is not a security measure by itself. It can help with security. But if you've got an implant on the network, if you've got administration rights on a network, you can actually see all of the virtual network packets that's passing your way. So it's not always a security measure, but it can help with security a little bit. But don't rely on it as a security measure, virtual networks. That means you can have two virtual networks where there's really only one network. So it does help a bit. We can all have authentication, authorization, and accounting, AAA. So for every server or service we use, we need to authenticate. You have a login for it. It then gives you permissions to do things, and we can have least privilege there. So you're only allowed to do what you need to do and nothing more. And accounting, everything is recorded, what you did access, which is sometimes useful if there's somebody manages to log in with some kind of fake number or overflow or something. Maybe there's a software error. It's often still accounted. So it's like if you've only allocated 10 users, user 1 to 10, maybe they found a software bug and they log in through user 1 million, then it'll be counted like user 1 million will be doing something, and you go, hey, wait, I've never allocated that. Somebody must have broke the software and so on. So accounting is often useful. Weird information often alerts people. Certificates use end-to-end security internally. end-to-end encrypted paths. So don't assume, let's just go back to a diagram. Don't assume that internally no bad person is listening. Always secure your traffic internally with encryption end-to-end. So assume, in your policy, you should assume that an attacker has gained entry into the network or network segment. So your email server, okay, it sends emails out often unencrypted, not always, but it could do. But emails internally, if you're sending emails internally to each other, you should have it. It's common to have it now. It should be encrypted. Same with your printer traffic, should be encrypted, but they often have old protocols, unfortunately, which can be broken. Everything should be encrypted internally, including directory listings in a file server, for example, SMB, which are often unencrypted, or at least when I looked a few years ago. So encrypt everything end-to-end internally, assuming that an attacker has access. Yep, as I've just said, actually, I'm jumping ahead of myself. Sorry about that. Is it naive to assume our network is secure? Assume someone has gained access to it. So IDS, intrusion detection system, encrypting end-to-end within our network, full security stack, certificates, AAA, and secure servers with firewalls internally on the server as well. As a last measure, well, not really last measure, it's a measure. Hardening end systems. Okay, so always maintain software up to date. Do we run a web server, a AAA server, ADDC on all of these, all on one powerful computer? Maybe we shouldn't run a lot of servers or virtual servers all on one single physical computer. We could divide it. We could divide these sensitive servers amongst different computers. So if one of them does get compromised, then they cannot use it as leverage to compromise all the others. For example, if you've got AAA server running on the same computer as a file server, then they could pretend that they are one of the legitimate users and cover their tracks. But if you're running them on different servers, then it's even if you compromise a file server, then you cannot compromise the AAA server. So you need to isolate these programs on different computers or different virtual machines. So either if you've got a lot of physical machines, you could do that. But more commonly nowadays, we use virtual machines, and we can separate each one on its own virtual machine. And they shouldn't be able to get out. However, because it's sandboxed, however, there have been holes in virtual machines before, and sometimes you can get out. So even that's not 100% safe, but it's a lot safer. Use sandboxing, lock down the software, even if you're even if you're in a virtual machine or using a physical machine, you can lock down the software further so that if the software is compromised, it cannot do things beyond its limits. If you have to run things on Windows, then stop a lot of services, stop a lot of capability, because you're not going to use it as a general machine. You don't need, for example, OpenGL and all of this, or whatever on a server that you knock together. Really, you'd use Server 2019 or something, actually. It can be still dangerous, but limited to whatever the application is. So you can isolate software by getting rid of other software which is not used, or other services which is not used on that computer. Are there any questions so far? Is anybody lost with anything? Yep, go on. Oh, yes.
On the slide number 28, there were virtual networks. Yeah. Yep.
VNets.
What do we understand by this for that specific network security? Like, is it a virtual LAN?
Yeah, virtual. I was thinking virtual LANs, that kind of thing for this one. But yeah, well, on this slide, I was thinking virtual LANs actually. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's technically not a security measure.
Yeah, it's a security measure. I was just confusing it with the cloud
Yeah.
network.
Yeah, I've just realized, yeah, it could be thought of something. The VLAN is technically not a security measure. It can be used to help security, but the thing with a VLAN is VLAN is virtual LAN. LAN is local area network. So VLAN, the thing with the VLAN is it can help with security, but only if you are not an administrator or not root of a machine which is receiving the packets. If the malware can get hold of the admin account or the root account of a machine which is plugged in to a VLAN, then you can see all the VLAN packets on that machine. Therefore, it's not a security measure in that case. However, it can be used to help security, but it shouldn't be thought of as a security measure in itself. But yeah, thinking about it, you can also go further and you can go to, for example, you can go to virtual private networks if they are if they've got integrity and maybe confidentiality on the network. That's like a VPN really, but internally.
VPN can be implemented on the internal network.
Yeah, you could do that.
Like the open source ones available.
Yeah. If you can't get a secure path by any other means, you could have an end-to-end encrypted channel, effectively a VPN. Depends on what you're doing internally. And then if it could be just one client connected to another machine, yeah, or another group of machines.
So in that case, the VPN, if you set up a VPN on an internal network, so all traffic will be encrypted. Yeah.
Well, if you set it up that way, or it could be to a certain IP address range. So it could have access to the unencrypted network and the VPN. But it could do certain information sharing between certain machines or certain services only over the VPN, for instance. So it's like a virtual private network within the internal network. Yeah, you can do that. I've seen that before as well on big corporate networks. And then nobody outside can see what they're doing on the inside of, kind of.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, in this one I was talking about VLANs. VLAN is technically not a security measure because there are some ways around it. It can help with security though. So I'm not saying don't use it, it can help. Do use it, but don't rely on it as security, VLAN. Also, physical hardening. Are your networks and systems secure according to the previous principles? But someone can walk in and connect to the physical network, just plug something in, and they've got access to things. So, well, if it's got authentication, authorization, you shouldn't be able to do that. But maybe they can. It's still not good to just allow somebody to physically plug in. Or someone can go and like physically touch with their fingers the server, and if they can touch it, they can insert a USB stick. And then a lot of things can happen if they insert a USB stick. Depending on how the computer is set up, that USB stick could pretend to be a network connection. Doesn't have to be other things. And so it could start sending network traffic over into the USB stick, and it could then forward onto the proper port or something like that. There's a lot of things that could happen. So you could do a lot if you can physically touch your computer, and if you can log in, that's even worse. Then you can completely subvert it. Yep, computers are left unlocked locally when you leave your computer and go for a coffee in the kitchen. Then are your computers left unlocked, and are customers and clients walking around your office, could they get into your computer? So these are the physical things to consider. Some people have, on some companies, they have like a wristband or a key, a springy key thing with a USB stick, which they plug in, or a magnetic one. And when they're close to the computer, they can unlock with a password. But if they walk more than like 1 or 2 meters away, then it will notice that you've left in about 5 or 10 seconds, and it will lock automatically. So I've seen them about. Not seen them that much about though.
What is the name of that, sir?
I don't know. There's different product names. I've not seen them much actually.
Must
I don't
be
know.
classified.
I don't know if there's a general name to them. There's the RSA things. I don't know if they do it. I don't know. I'll have to have a look. I've seen it only as private company products, and I've not seen many of them around in use. In fact, I've only seen them in use once, I think, in a small company. Yeah, and I don't know how effective they were as well. So there's some links here. Let's move on. Okay, so yeah, so just have a think about all of this, and this feeds into 2 of the assignments, I think. No, sorry, exercises in the last assignment. 2 of the exercises in the last assignment. So consider each of the previous points for targeted and non-targeted attacks. And maybe you can find more ways to mitigate against exploit, or even to harden. Hopefully you'll have a good think about this. Think about all of these different things: network accessing or limiting access via network, wired and wireless, social or human and organizational access and trickery, or air-gapped access as well, for example, USB stick. Do think about this further. Are there any questions on this? Okay, we can wrap that up there. Also take questions.